We've talked a lot on the YouTube channel about Dead Space and this franchise, guys, from the past to the present and what we were hoping and what we have been hoping for in the future, that being Dead Space 4. And I want to go ahead and talk in this segment of the show, guys, about some concerns I have about Dead Space 4 ever happening. And obviously, these have been concerns that we've had for a while, but the longer that time goes and you don't hear any word, any rumblings, any, real speculation of a Dead Space 4 coming, it does give you some concern. So let's talk about it, guys. Obviously, we've talked a lot about Dead Space and this franchise. You guys can check out all of my Dead Space content here on YouTube, but Dead Space 4 is a title that I've absolutely have wanted to see for quite some time. Dead Space is one of my favorite franchises when it comes to the horror space, the horror genre. Absolutely love Dead Space. It is up there with some of the greatest ever when it comes to the horror video games, right? Let's get the positives out of the way first. Number one, guys, is that Glenn Schofield is obviously one of the creators of the Dead Space universe. They are working, him and his studio, are working on none other than a new title that's going to be coming out called The Callisto Protocol. And a lot of people are tying this in with none other than, of course, Dead Space, because it kind of has those creepy vibes and you kind of those thoughts possibly that this is going to be a Dead Space spin-off or something of that nature. But it's been confirmed, guys, that it's actually in the PUBG universe, which I think is very intriguing to say the least. And we've been talking about the Callisto Protocol here on the YouTube channel as well. But that's a real positive sign. That tells us that, look, Dead Space may be, a game that came out a while back, that being Dead Space 3 and such, the latest in the franchise, but there are still people that are kind of giving almost a kudos to the past, a kudos to Dead Space, and even in their most, up-and-coming games. In this case, with Glenn Schofield being none other than the Callisto Protocol. So there are positive things happening in the horror space. I mean, we see this amongst so many other games that are coming out, guys, that are, really trying to raise the bar when it comes to the horror genre. We're starting to see more and more, there is a real want and need for more horror games in the video game industry, right? And it kind of reminds me of the filmmaking industry. Horror genre has always been a thing, but it's actually become more and more popular over the past number of years now. And so now with video games, I think we're starting to see that more right now. The Last of Us Part 2 coming out, and you're starting to see more and more titles that are trying to kind of be somewhat like The Last of Us. But then you have other titles that are trying to kind of reminisce of the past, kind of like of games like Dead Space. So even though Dead Space and there's real concern I have for Dead Space 4, I'm very excited about the future of the horror genre. Let's get that out of the way. And the Callisto Protocol in particular when it comes to that. I mean, there's a multitude of games, guys. Resident Evil Village. And I mean, the list goes on and on of all kinds of different titles coming out in the horror space. But Dead Space 4 in particular, we know that Visceral Games obviously was, shut down by EA. EA owns the rights to Dead Space and this franchise, at least at this point. So I believe there's one of two things that could really, happen. Obviously, EA could very well just leave Dead Space in a limbo state, a state of no return, to never be rebooted ever again. Or they could give the reins to another, company or to a new development team to kind of do a reboot, a soft reboot of the Dead Space franchise, which I think would be very smart. Personally, you start with like a remaster of the first three, the original trilogy, and then you come out with a Dead Space 4. I think it would make a lot of sense to me. And I still think that there is a very passionate fan base here, especially with the growing amount of, community around the horror genre. I think Dead Space 4 absolutely should be a part of that ecosystem. The other thing, though, that, we talk about is that they could sell the IP, which is pretty unlikely when we look at the grand scope of the video game industry and how things work. Usually you're not seeing development companies or publishers buy just individual IPs. We see things like Microsoft buying out all of Bethesda, right? buying out the entire company and everything that they hold, all the IPs that they have. We see Microsoft doing that. Obviously now Xbox has the exclusive rights to Bethesda's titles moving forward. We see things like that happening. But seeing individual IPs being sold and bought, we don't see that as much, which I think that should be something that should start happening more often. But EA could sell the IP of Dead Space if they decided to the highest bidder, and I'm sure there would be some companies would be interested in rebooting Dead Space, to say the least. We know that Dead Space, guys, the mistakes that were made were really within Dead Space 3. The first game was great. Dead Space 2 I thought was even better than the first one. And then third game was a real valley to the peaks we were getting in Dead Space 1 and 2. Obviously, going from the concept of what made Dead Space so great in the first two games was obviously a horror game with action elements. But what they did in Dead Space 3 was they flip-flopped it. They made it an action game with some horror elements in it. Completely went against what Dead Space was all about from the first two titles. And then obviously they kind of added co-op a little bit, too little too late sort of thing, adding co-op. The reviews were not good for Dead Space 3, and the sales were not good at all, according to EA and what they were expecting to make from Dead Space 3, ultimately resulting in Visceral Games being shut down and the state of none other than Dead Space in this franchise being put into a place of unknowns. So I'm concerned, guys, because we're starting to see more and more companies now. It seems that developers and people working on some of these titles are moving, on to other studios, other places, and some of those individuals really appreciate what was, with some of these games that they've worked on in the past, like, for example, Dead Space, or another one would be StarCraft. You look at what's going on with Blizzard and with StarCraft in that franchise, a lot of people ended up leaving Blizzard to join a new studio that was formed, Frost Giant Studios, or join Dreamhaven, which was also created. And what you're seeing is that these guys are moving over to other studios and are creating new RTS titles. Whereas like StarCraft, being the RTS title of our time, it doesn't seem like there is much going on there as far as like Blizzard that they're going to continue making more StarCraft games. Because if they were, I feel like a lot of these people that were former employees now would still be at Blizzard working on StarCraft 3. But instead, they're moving on to other studios. I see that also in a space like the horror genre, where you see guys and girls that end up leaving these development studios and move on to other studios. And a lot of times they're going to another studio where there's an ambition, there is a real vision for another game similar to something they've already worked on. So, for example, the Callisto Protocol guys, obviously Glenn Schofield had his hands all over the Dead Space franchise, and now he's working on the Callisto Protocol, which is in the PUBG universe. But you can really see a lot of ties here, even though we haven't seen a lot as of yet from Callisto Protocol. But it seems like there are definitely a lot of kudos there to Dead Space. So what I'm getting at, guys, is I'm concerned about the future of StarCraft and StarCraft 3, that game ever coming out. And I made a video about that here on the YouTube channel. And the same thing can be said now with Dead Space. I'm starting, the more time goes, the more we're seeing these developers and these creators go from one studio to another, and now they're working on a horror game as well from a different studio that has kind of a vibe of Dead Space or of that nature. You start to wonder, maybe there just are no plans for the foreseeable future in Dead Space. EA just, has left it to be in a state of potential no return, a limbo state. And it's really unfortunate, guys, because it's one of my favorite horror games of all time. But as I said, I'm very bullish and excited about the future of the horror genre, to say the least. I mean, I'm very excited about it. I mean, we're getting more horror games now than we ever have in recent history when it comes to the video game industry. So I'm very excited about all the different titles we're going to be getting. There's just always going to be that emptiness in me that we never got a continuation of Dead Space when I thought that it had so much potential moving forward. But I would love to hear from you guys. Are you guys concerned about Dead Space 4? Do you think there's still a chance that it could come back? What do you think would need to happen for it to come back? Let me know in the comment section down below. And for more Dead Space 4 content and videos, stay here with Zero TV.